Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm with Andrew Jones, owner and winemaker of Field Recordings in Paso Robles. Welcome, Andrew, and tell us about Field Recordings.
Field Recordings is a little winery I started back in 2007 in Paso Robles, and kind of started to tell my stories, or tell the stories of my days on the road. I'm a nurseryman by trade doing grape rootstock, and I wanted to make wines from the vineyards that I thought were unique and different and had a story behind them. So, we called the project Field Recordings. Essentially, it's people, place, and time captured in a bottle.
Wow, I love that. And so do you own any property, or are you just sourcing fruit? And if so, where are you sourcing from?
So we have one vineyard, or I have one vineyard of my own. It's a little 11-acre old Zinfandel vineyard up on the northwest side of Paso. But we primarily source all of our grapes as far north as Arroyo Seco and as far south as the Happy Canyon of Santa Barbara.
Ooh. So quite a range of Central Coast. And because you're telling a place and a time and working with different vineyards, what are some of the different varieties that you work with?
I always say that I grow and make basically everything from Albarino to Zinfandel. We have the whole A through Z, yeah. But overall, we make about 30 wines each year. But we do, we start out with a lot of the Loire Valley varieties. We do a lot of Chenin Blanc, Cabernet Franc. But then I also started getting into Italian varieties over the last few years. But yeah, a little bit of everything.
Very cool. And if you're making 30 different lots, what's your total case production, but also per lot? How many of each lot are you making?
So we make about 20,000 cases of wine a year, but that's kind of skewed because if you take our Fiction red wine, our Wonderwall Pinot Noir, and our Skins orange wine out of it, that accounts for 75% of the production. So those are kind of the main wines for us. And Pet Nat too now has become kind of a main thing for us. So, usually the wines kind of float between our range will go from 75 case lots to 7,500 case lots.
And again, total production?
Around 20,000.
Okay, so you've grown quite a bit.
So yeah, we my first year in 2007, I crushed 4 tons of grapes, and we'll do about 600 this year. Wow! So it's grown a little bit over the years.
And where are your wines available? Are they just in the local market, or are they available nationally?
Available nationally. I think currently we're in 40 states, and then we do a little bit of international sales. Over the years, we had a couple things that we introduced. We were early on with the canned wine movement, and that really expanded our distribution network. Just over the last few years, our Pet Nats have really taken hold and expanded the network too.
Yeah,
so
Pet Nat's popular.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
First memory relevant to wine? I didn't grow up around wine at all. We were a spirits house, and actually that's one thing. I had an uncle that was always kind of the bartender for the family. He was a brand manager for one of the large corporate spirit companies. Mm-hmm. But the spirit company, it was kind of funny. The first wine I remember being around the house, and this was in the early 90s, and it's the Chardonnay craze was taking off. And the spirit company owned, he worked for Allied Domecq, which I don't even know what their name is now.
Right.
It's one of those,
I don't remember.
with all the consolidation or acquisition stuff that's gone on. But they had the one wine, I remember him pulling it out, because usually he would make drinks for my parents, aunt, and uncles and all that. And it was the new thing that the company had bought, Clos de Bois. And it was Clos de Bois Chardonnay. That was the first wine I ever remember being around the house, and really the only wine I ever remember being around the house. I discovered wine later on in college. It was something that I sort of fell into rather than like this was the path that I knew I wanted to be on. It was happenstance that ended up in wine.
And so you didn't grow up around it, but you said that in college you started to get into it. Do you remember sort of, I'm sure there have been many wines along the way, but one of those aha wines, like a wine you tasted that you just said, wow, this is, whether it's the wine that set you on the path to making wine or just a wine that set you on the path to discovering wine. Is there one wine that stands out to you?
It's tough to say. I don't know, like one wine. It's really tough to say actually on like the wine that kind of grabbed me in on stuff. I do remember the first time I had Viognier, and it was actually at a Cal Poly fundraiser type event, and I had this feeling like, what is this? I didn't know it existed. And there was like flavor profiles that I didn't know. I remember it was at the Avila Beach golf course, and that was one wine that I remember like as a new experience sort of thing. Other thing too, like there's certain like varieties I can go back and like remember the first time I had them. That was like, I remember discovering Grenache Blanc was like back in like, sort of been like 04, 05. Or there was a old producer down in St. Inez that was making this Grenache Blanc. I remember going out to dinner with my girlfriend at the time, now wife, and like it was like our favorite. That was like the first wine that was like our favorite wine as a couple that we were both like, my wife and I were ecstatic over. It was this Curran Grenache Blanc from St. Inez. That was good. That was one. That was an early on one. I had a job in college also working for Bonnie Doon Vineyard. They used to have a tasting room down here in Paso Robles, and I remember like having all kinds of new discoveries kind of through that process. Like, kind of like being introduced to like just general table wine and stuff, like when he was doing the Big House Red and all that, and like these the concept of having like the table wine, house wine sort of concept was really cool. I always liked that kind of stuff. But yeah, all a bunch of different ones, but no like specific time.
Lots of wines along the way.
Yeah, lots of wines along the way.
And so, have you traveled around the world tasting wines, or focused more locally?
I have. I've focused on France specifically in travels, and also done Argentina. I have been. The next trip is definitely going to be Italy. I always had this whole thing. I was going to keep going back to France because there was so much to digest of all the French history and things. Before even
you
like
discovered Italy has the same thing.
Yeah. So it was like Italy's going to be way more in depth, but yeah. So done Argentina, done France. I think 4 times now, yeah. So definitely, I'm a fan of old world wines, and even like a lot of the stuff like where field recording started as making wines to tell the stories of these certain vineyards. Like in travels, I basically got inspired by other wines and wanted to come back here and find the vineyards that could produce grapes that could give us a wine in that style. Because not all, not all areas on the Central Coast can make old world style wines. We just have too much good weather.
Damn that sun.
Yeah.
So if we were to come into your home and go into your cellar, what would we find in there?
So, in my own cellar, the one variety, and this is one thing, like the most intriguing wine to me of all wines, even though I make all these weird backwards varieties and all that, is I'm actually a big Chardonnay fan. Like Chardonnay Chardonnay is the most intriguing grape to me. Like you can make it in so many different styles and be at a high quality. And it's one of those things too, like some people will knock Chardonnay for, it's being so generic, but at the same time, Chardonnay would have never gotten to that point if there weren't such amazing things you could do with it and making it. And it's also another variety that doesn't get any of the attention for being one of the hardest ones to make. Like, and it's really difficult to ferment. There's a lot of nuance to making Chardonnay that I don't think, with cool climate varieties, everybody always talks about Pinot Noir being so finicky and all that. Like Pinot is easy in my opinion. Chardonnay is really where like the 2 hardest things I think to make are Zinfandel and Chardonnay.
So we'd find a lot of Chardonnay in your home?
Yes, a lot of Chardonnay.
From all over?
All over the place. Like big fan of Old World Chard. Kind of like, I like all styles of California stuff too. Like if you're gonna go for like on that leaner, more Chablis inspired, minerally type chard. To another thing too, I was revisiting, to bring up another podcast, but like I just re-listened to the John Kongsgaard, Levi Dalton podcast just this week, and like that's another wine that I love, and I think it's like 100% new oak or 200% oak or and it's just a massive, huge Chardonnay. But that is one of my favorite wines too in the Chardonnay category. Like in fact, I've been kind of on a kick too on like on some of those like very traditional. Like I always feel with California wine, there's very little history in California, but the history that we do have, no one appreciates. And there's like such good. Like I've knocked out this week, like doing stuff on like Kongsgaard, Jim Clendenin. There was a deal on Stony Hill I was listening to the other day. I just started listening to one on Mount Eden this morning. But those are like the real, like, that's one thing I think is really cool. Like that group from the 70s, 80s that came up, they're like the original new wave California winemakers and the projects that they did. That's like really intriguing to me.
So you have a lot of Chardonnay at home. Is there a Chardonnay or another wine that you've opened recently that drank really well? Or what did you drink last night?
What did I drink last night? What did I drink last night?
It was so good you don't remember.
It's so good I don't remember. Well, no, I'm just trying to think of stuff that we've opened recently in the summer. We've been really pushing. It's been kind of a crazy harvest. The harvest was a lot more compacted. So I usually like to make lunch for my team a couple times a week, but it's been really hard to do that because we've been having to do a swing shift to make all the work done. So we've been instead going into my cellar here at the winery and popping bottles of stuff for. So at least if we can't sit down to have lunch together, everybody's got some good wine to taste when they do take their break, and we can kind of talk about that at times. We had some Seritage Chardonnay last week that was killer from Sonoma County. We did actually the last one we did, this was on Thursday of last week, we did full body. There's a great deli in Paso Robles called Full Belly Deli, and so we actually try to like think of a cheesy theme to have with our lunches. So we did full body, full belly. So we did like the kind of the crew from West Paso that does bigger, riper red wines. That was a really good tasting.
So, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No, I don't think the perfect wine exists. That's one of the things too. Even like I have a second label that focuses on kind of, I call it my fanboy wines. We do Chard, Pinot Noir, the Cool Climate Syrah, and Nebbiolo. The label is called Wonderwall, and Wonderwall is the invisible barrier between you and your dreams. And I think that's one of the things for me that I really like about making wine is, in my mind I can taste and I can see that perfect wine, but it really doesn't exist. And it's one of those things every year with making wine, we come into the, every harvest season, like this is the year that we're going to just knock it out of the park and nail it. And you're never going to nail it. You can make like, I forget who said it. There was, somebody had a line about like, I'm still yet to make my best, like every year getting better at making wine. But that ideal perfect wine isn't out there, but we're going to keep trying for it every year. And, we'll never get there, but at least,
we always have a goalpost to reaching for. We have a goal,
yeah. We always have that goal that we're reaching for to get there.
Do you think there's one great variety that almost achieves perfection, or same thing? It's.
I think if you were going to have anything to get there, I think it's going to be Pinot and Chardonnay. Like I think Burgundy is what represents wine the best as far as why wine is a superior alcoholic beverage choice to all other things out there. Like if you kind of break down, like, I mean, in the end, like, you got wine, like, why is wine more special than spirits or beer or anything like that? And like spirits and beer are just so commodity driven with being grain based and everything that there's no, like, if you were to take the complete opposite, polar opposite of that, it's going to be Burgundy. And like how, like, how come this like quarter of a hectare is different than the other quarter of a hectare that's literally a 1.5 lane
it's
road.
Like what you said, you're trying to tell the stories of places because they mean something. So as you're aspiring to reach these levels of perfection, always kind of reaching up to make the best wine you possibly can, What's your opinion on wine critics and scores?
I'm actually pretty humored by it, in all honesty. Like the way that the system is written on that stuff. Like, the one thing too that I don't know if our consumers realize is, like, there's a house palette with every critic, and does your palette line up with that critic's palette, kind of thing? And it is good, like, if you're looking for guidance and that, like, typically your palate agrees with this palate, but know that, like, I don't think the consumer necessarily knows that that can be skewed and stuff. Like, I mean, it's funny they bring this up because, like, we don't typically submit wines to critics for scores and stuff, but some local folks that I really like and known for a long time, they were organizing one of the tastings for one of the big name critics, and they asked if we'd submit, and they're rounding up new brands or newer wines and stuff that aren't in the typical flights and stuff, and we submitted, and we got the one that was interesting, like, we did, because I don't make wines in a specific style. We're telling the story of that vineyard, and that each vineyard matches a certain wine style. It doesn't, like, that's one thing I'm really kind of anti, is when the winemaker treats it as like their artistic expression. That's not the field recording style at all. So, I do have some red wines that are north of 14 alcohol and are fruit driven and all that, but I also have white wines that are 10% alcohol and acid driven and all about mineral and nuance and all that. Like,
you're letting the place dictate.
Letting the place dictate what happens. And and we sent these wines to the critic, and I think I got actually the lowest score he's ever published for one of our white wines. And it was, like, totally fine, but and the one that was interesting, like, and we got relatively decent scores on some other wines that fit their palate more, and it's just
okay, we're not going to, so don't base field recordings on scores. We're going to base it on palate, like you said. Having, like, as a consumer listening to this, if you want to know about field recordings, then you've got to understand your own palate and get this. So let's talk about your palate.
Yeah.
Red, white, or rosé?
White.
Still or sparkling?
Still.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Usually I get sparkling and I'm, like, ready for the champagne.
I love sparkling wine. We make a lot of sparkling wine here, but I'm more intrigued by still white wines. I think that's, like, I can be most enamored with that over anything.
I'm with you. So how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you think there are hard and fast rules to live by, white wine and fish, red wine and meat, or do you take a different approach to pairing your wine and food?
Like,
you like full-bodied, full belly.
Yeah. I'm not super traditional on it. Like, I think for me, it's just, or I can even, for giving advice to people on stuff, like, drink something that you like, and it's still going to have, like, it's one of those things almost in wine tasting. Like, you can taste wine to pull out the negatives in the wine, or you can taste the wine to pull out the positives in the wine. And typically, with a well-made wine and well-made food, like, there's going to be something positive on both sides that pairs together. So I don't think it needs to necessarily be as picked apart, but there is those magic pairings though. So, like, I totally have appreciation for the magic pairings, but overall, I'd say I'm stoked that people are choosing to have wine. I mean, I also like wine with, like, really simple things, like, you're doing fast food restaurants and wine, or, like, just, it doesn't have to be always, complicated menus to pair with wine. Like, let's go.
And in terms of choosing red or white, just whatever you're in the mood for.
Whatever you're in the mood for. I think there's a white wine to go with a lot of stuff that would, like, that some people, traditional folks, be like, it's red only, and vice versa.
So, with all the wines you have to taste and all the wines you drink pulling out of your cellar, sometimes we're known for drinking a little too much. Do you have any remedies for those hangover days? Any special cures?
Shoot.
Drink more.
I'm not a big hair of the dog fan. That's one thing I would just, like, there's, accept the hangover, deal with it. It's part of the process, kind of deal. But I mean,
you earned it.
Yeah, you earned it. But I don't know. I'm a sucker for a good breakfast burrito. I think that kind of cures all on any rough morning. Whether it like really makes your tummy feel better, or if it's just the breakfast burrito bliss. But that would probably be my answer on that one.
What do you think that someone who hasn't tasted your wines yet is missing out on?
It depends on what I'm, in what context on that. Like, I think if we're talking Paso Robles, like I think we do a lot of stuff to show that Paso Robles does different style wines, and we're capable of doing a lot of different things here. That would be one thing. If we're talking bigger wine scene in general, I think that we can show that there's other varieties out there that can really shine, rather than just being the typical Chard Pinot Cab world that California's known for.
Well, so now you said you make on average 30 different wines per year. If space aliens were to land on your property, which of your wines would you want to introduce them to field recordings?
Shoot. I think I would probably go with Pet Nat on that if we were having something totally outsider, because what we've done with Pet Nat is so the one thing that's really tough with Pet Nat is because of the timing involved with making it, with being sort of a nouveau sparkling wine, and it's ready to package typically right in the middle of harvest and all that kind of stuff, and it's just such a cool, interesting flavor profile because people like bubbles, but then there's like this raw character to Pet Nat that I think people also enjoy. And I would probably do that because I think the one thing, no matter what type of sparkling wine you make, sparkling wine is so much more process driven. It's like being the pastry chef versus the chef de cuisine. Like, numbers matter, and it's not just taste and feel. Like, you need to combine taste and feel. Because first off, if you don't have the numbers right, it doesn't turn out the way you want it. And then, so you got to get the numbers right, and then you work on the taste after.
So you're going to impress them with bubbles.
I'm going to impress them with bubbles. Yeah, because I think that's going to be the just in looking at everything we make, and if it's like a total outsider like that, that would be the thing I would show.
So, you've mentioned that being here in California, we benefit from good weather pretty consistently, and then also you're trying to tell the story of a vineyard. So, how much do you think vintage plays a part in that? How much variation do you see from vintage to vintage, or do you see more similarities year after year?
I've been starting to see more similarities year after year. I think the main thing has come, well, typically it would be like cold number one. Like, if we have a cool season and it's tight on getting the grapes ripe, and we potentially, like we've had years in Paso where not everything's been in, and we've had our first frost. And basically, you got to just get everything brought in. Or if we have to deal with any weather coming in rain-wise, the new dynamic would be like managing smoke,
right?
That kind of stuff. But it's like more of those like tragic events, like rain, frost, smoke, and those sort of things, rather than the actual like overall vintage. Is there going to be any like third party sort of things thrown at us? Otherwise, like the vintage, everything typically ends up working out. Like, you might have to tweak I pick everything off of the acidity levels of grapes. I don't worry about bricks as much. So that's the other thing too, is we do have relatively lower alcohol levels than a lot of stuff here in Paso. Because of that, because like the one thing I have gotten to through the years is if I don't have the proper natural acidity to the wines, I don't end up liking the finished wine. And so that's been a big thing for me on managing that, like, versus like, because we, not to open a whole can of worms, we try to keep a more natural wine type process to things. It's not how I got into the whole thing. I mean, I'm a nurseryman vineyard guy that I've never had any formal training in enology, so like we don't use any winemaking products here because I don't know how to use any of them. Like, really, it's like, you start with a good vineyard and all that, and it's kind of cliche, like, the wine's made in a vineyard type deal, but
so you're minimal intervention.
Yeah, minimal intervention. So
I'm curious, because you're a nurseryman, so being out in the field is where you're comfortable, and and you know vines intimately like you know plants. Do you talk to your vines? And if so, what do you say to them?
Definitely no talking to them.
Never?
Never. No, I've gotten, that's actually the one thing too. Like, I think the nursery world has gotten me a little bit callous to the farming side of it too. Like, it's like, I don't get worked up over little things not going right. Like, we figure out a way to deal with it. Like, in the nursery world, like, people, like, majority of my customers think it's like it's a factory for grapevines, but like, we're farming too, just the same way that they're farming out in the field. We're just farming at a really high density. And it's one of those things, like, it's taught me to roll with the punches more. I stay pretty even keel. Like, something might happen. This is not the end of the world. We will figure out a way to get through it and all that. It's not like, trying to not getting fired up that things aren't behaving.
So you never have to reprimand your vines?
No, no reprimand.
Are there any rituals, good luck rituals, or sort of things that you do at the start of harvest as a team or for yourself that is sort of like that marker of another year?
Good luck rituals. Let's see. Here's one thing that we've actually gotten to over the years, and so there's like the reality of things now is one of the biggest challenges for us is labor and all that. And so you don't, the days of the winemaker going out to the vineyard, tasting the fruit, and then asking the grower to then have it picked the next morning is not doable. We don't have you might be able to do that from time to time, but really there's not the labor available to pull that off. So you have to do a lot of forecasting and stuff. And that's actually one thing where I've embraced the biodynamic system, because it's one of those things. It's like a lot of biodynamics.
He says with such trepidation.
Yeah, well, no, a lot of biodynamics is a bit voodoo, in my opinion. To think that energy is brought into the soil through a cow horn and energy is given out into the atmosphere through a deer antler is a stretch for me. But like, at the same time though, like, I think the whole concept of working with the lunar calendar, there is some, like, it's not exact science, but there are some things that I think can be learned from that system. Because there's been a lot of successful people that have been huge believers in that through generations.
Right. So these are by following the moons and following these cycles, you're able to look for certain predictors of
so
where you are in the process.
So like, if I'm picking, like, I go out to the vineyard, I know that these grapes are going to need to be picked within 7 to 10 days, and I'm going to be in that window, and then to kind of work with our growers better and have a better system to know that, because I don't want the grapes to go past, because I'm also worried about that natural acidity. So it's kind of like, well, we're going to have fruit days on Wednesday and Thursday of next week. So like, I will then coordinate, all right, let's go for Wednesday for the pick day, because I know I'm about there, but then I'll use that as like the icing on the cake. Like, that's going to be the day, because we're going to work into the calendar that way. And it's a little bit backwards, and like, some people would say that, like, I should be more formal and rigid on the things, but it's like,
it works for you.
It works. So, that definitely would be a thing for me is, so then this year we actually made it, out of, I forget the final amount of lots that came in, but I think we had like 50 lots of grapes come in this year, and 48 of them were all picked on accordingly to the calendar. There was only one, it was our last pick actually, where I was like, we're not going to be able to make it with the heat that was coming into the next set of fruit days, and we pulled it. So I didn't want to have too overripe fruit.
Wow. So moving away from, you were a nurseryman before you became a winemaker, but when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you want to be in the nursery business, or was there something else?
No, I was more on track to play football for a career or golf, or my two sports. But I was just like, that's kind of too how I got into the wine business. I was, a meathead football player that just happened to take a football scholarship to Cal Poly, and Cal Poly makes you pick a major coming in, and I ended up being ag business. And then when I ended up in ag business, I was like, well, this is just a business degree, but my elective courses are in ag sciences. And viticulture sounds a lot more fun than dairy science or poultry management or anything like that. So
sometimes you just got to let life take you where life takes you.
That's one thing I get a kick out of with like working in ag. I remember, and my wife always teases me on this because she grew up around ag more, but I didn't know what FFA was until I got to college. Again, I would show up at Cal Poly, like they had some convention for it. I was like, why are all these high school kids walking around in these like blue corduroy jackets? Like, what is this thing? It's like,
and for the city girl, FFA is?
Future Farmers of America, I think. It's a huge thing though. Like we had, where I grew up, there was some people like, I knew what 4-H was as far as like a deal, but FFA was like a whole nother level from 4-H as far as agricultural education. So
now today, what do you do when you're not working for fun?
Spend a lot of time with family. I got 4 little kids.
Ooh.
So
you don't have fun. Yeah. I mean, you have kid fun, but
kid fun. Yeah. So now I have 3 boys and a daughter. My wife really wanted a daughter. She got lucky on the 4th try. That was as many.
Or you got lucky on the 4th try.
Or I got lucky on the 4th try. That was as far as I was going to go on the attempts. But yeah, a lot of family time. I still play a lot of golf. Like that's my therapy. I always say it's like it's getting outside, being active, but then like I kind of clear my mind out there. So it's therapeutic for me. A lot of people like despise it as a sport and a game because it can be so frustrating. But yeah, for me, it's zen.
So you mentioned earlier that one of the first wines that kind of made an impact on you. You and your wife had fallen in love with Grenache Blanc. On those rare nights that you get a romantic evening with your wife, what wines are you opening to set the mood of romance?
So my wife also really likes, she likes Italian reds and then just white wine in general. So
you've got a nice range of wines you can pick.
Like it's one that's like. It's one of those things too, like I would say with Italian varieties, they have a signature funk character that is always in them. And like, I think that for red wines, I can always tell like she'll be a sucker for anything Italian red, whether it be something made domestically or some, a true Italian red. And then white wine, like she usually goes for, I'd say the only white wine she typically isn't into is Sauvignon Blanc because it ends up being a little bit too, she's sensitive to the grassy cat pea sort of character that can have at times. And so basically anything outside of Sauv Blanc.
Wow, you've got quite a range. So what's your sports team football-wise as a former football player?
Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Okay, so if Notre Dame were to win, which of your wines would you want to present to them?
That'd be tough. I don't think I would have like because that's one thing too, like picking the favorite wine and like picking the favorite kid. Like I don't.
Fair enough.
I don't think
you'd be so proud of them you wouldn't know which wine to give them.
I wouldn't know what wine to give them. No.
Well, how many people are on a football team? You probably could give them each one different bottle of wine.
Yep.
So, what was the best piece of advice you've ever received? When you think back, whether it was for life or for work or something else, is there a piece of advice that you carry with you each day? So kind of 2 things on that. The one, my mentor, Jeff, he was retiring from the Grapevine Nursery as I was getting out of college. I have a minor in viticulture, but really like learned everything over the 2 years that I got to work with Jeff as he was phasing out of the nursery. And he had a line that was like, the only thing you should be fearful of in this business is someone that says there's only one way to do things. Because it's one of those things like, there's so many different ways to get to the finish line with wine. And all that, and like really the person that's adamant that this is the only way that you can do it, and it is something to be cautious of. And I've always been a big believer in that. And then another line that I got from a really good customer of ours down in Los Angeles, the owner of Silver Lake Wines. He has this whole spiel that he goes on about grateful, helpful, thankful, and in the end, that's the key to success in your
business, especially when, it is, and not just with you're in hospitality, every day you're grateful for that opportunity. While you're there, everything is a team effort, and it's all about being helpful to the team, to everything. It's all just whatever you can do through that day to be helpful for the greater good. And then at the end of the day, you're thankful that you had that opportunity and you're ready to come back and do it again the next day.
I think those are very good words to live by.
Yeah.
If you could give advice to our listeners, what advice would you give them?
Next time you go out for that nice dinner, just, choose wine versus having a cocktail. Start the meal off with some white wine before going into reds or something like that, rather than doing the cocktail and then have a bottle of red wine with your main. Or I don't know, I just like it when people choose wine. I think another thing would just be get out of your comfort zone a little bit with wine. I think really the wine world opens up when you get out of your comfort zone, because that's one of the things. There's just so many options out there that it is an important thing to not just get so rigid. I drink this brand of this with this variety and all that.
When you look back, you started this in 2007, and you've got a good decade under your belt of making wine and had a career before that. When you look back, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date in your work? You can't say your 4 children, because in your work, not in your personal life.
We've done some stuff with the winery project that have, I think, helped, the wine industry evolve. I don't say that we changed anything, but we definitely have helped with evolving the California wine industry. So one thing, we were on the front line for introducing cans to the market. I don't do cans anymore. We actually had gotten to a spot that was too big for me to handle, and we sold the brand to one of the larger companies. But I think we were the third kind of new wave can producer in the U.S. Back in 2012.
Wow.
So that was a cool thing to be a part of. The other thing, though, that I think I'm most proud, some people will say, when you start to sell wine to bigger stores or chains, kind of thing, that you've sort of sold out. It's like the old the punk rock sellout sort of thing. But it's one of those things too, though. I think it's a sign that things that you've not necessarily made it, but it's the next step in your business. And
you're not a big brand, making lack of a better word, one generic grape variety or something. You've got 30 different wines and you're speaking a land. That's something to be in those bigger stores.
Yeah. So that was, and we this spring actually we got our national placement for one of the large food one of the large grocery companies for PetNat. And I think it's the first time a PetNat wine has ever been on a national display for a national grocery chain. Wow. Which I think is pretty awesome. To get, because that was the other thing too for some of the wines that we make. We make a lot of PetNat here. We make a lot of orange wine as another big item for us. Skink, to get those into the mainstream. It's who would have thought 10 years ago that you would see PetNat on a grocery end cap?
Nobody knew what PetNat or orange wine was 10 years ago.
Exactly. So that's one thing that I've been pretty stoked on. We still, 95% of our business is done with independent retail restaurant type stuff. But yeah, to see that transition, it's that's just pretty cool.
Awesome.
So they aren't hitting up the big mega conglomerates to make that wine for them. They're coming to the city.
Okay, now play a little game. I want you to finish a sentence for me. A table without wine is like
the kids' table at the big family Thanksgiving. Even though some of those have wine on it from time to time.
Yeah, occasionally. So another question for you is, if you imagine a scenario like a dinner table where a group of people are enjoying wine and your wine is on the table, is there someone of notoriety, fame, fortune, or in your life that you wish was drinking your wine?
Ooh, on that one, I really don't have, I'm just stoked for anybody that wants to drink one of our bottles of wine. That was one thing too, there's so many wines that people can choose from that, like, if anybody chooses to have a bottle of Field Recordings wine, like, we are like super grateful that they would, with all the options, that they would pick Field Recordings.
I like that. Anyone is welcome to have a Field Recordings wine on their table.
Like,
anyone. Okay, so if you were going to a deserted island, what 3 wines would you take with you?
Interesting here. So, 3 deserted island wines. One, I actually would start with a red because I would go with the standard Arroyo Grande Valley Estate Pinot Noir from Tally Vineyards because they're kind of old guard Central Coast Pinot producers, but like I think that's like the most classic of all Central Coast Pinots, and I've always just loved that wine. And I do like Pinot, so after Chard, you go to Pinot. But that's one I'd always say, like, I go back and forth because we have this discussion, my wife and I, when we go with the standard estate, not estate, but like the Santa Maria Valley one from Foxen in Santa Barbara County, or we go Tally, just estate. And I love their single vineyard wines in the higher tier, but like, just give me their classic one. So that would be for the reds.
Okay.
And then on the white wine, I probably would go, I mean, some of those like North Coast Chard producers I've been really into lately. So like right now, if you're going to ask me, I would be like Hirsch Chardonnay or Seritage Chard, something along those lines I've been really into.
And your third wine?
Third wine would be, see, this other one, I haven't talked about it much, but I do like, probably some Syrah from Wonderwall.
Okay.
I've worked with them for a long time on the nursery front, but I'm a huge fan of Cayuse as well from up there. And like, there's one thing too, I'm not a big fan of eating olives, but olives and wine are one of my favorite notes on red wine. And I really like Syrah when it has that like overly heavy tapenade character on it. And I think for New World, that Walla does it the best for that, pulling out that flavor profile. You'll have it in Paso, but like for that like more salty olive, green olive, white pepper kind of character, I think you get more of that from up there.
Okay, so now...
Another one's Chard too. The other Chardonnay I might have to swap out for. Oregon Chardonnay, which I think, Oregon, they always go Pinot, but like Chardonnay from Oregon, I think, is the perfect middle point between, white Burgundy and California. So that'd be the other thing.
Okay, you get 4 wines.
4 wines. So it'd be Arthur.
I'm not that strict.
It'd be Arthur Chardonnay from DDO in Oregon. I really like the Demi-Duran Chard. That's been the wine that I've been sort of infatuated with lately.
So now we'll play a little game, pairing wine with music, just as we finish this up, because we're towards the end of this anyway. But based on some of the wines you've talked about, tell me what kind of music it makes you think of, what you'd want to listen to. It can be a genre, it can be a particular song, a particular musician. But let's start with your desert island wines. So your North Coast Chardonnay.
Okay, so the North Coast Chardonnay, I'm going to go really obnoxiously cheesy pop country, because it's one of those things that's so poppy and so cheesy, but you can't help but just sit there and just like go. It's annoying with how easy it is to listen to, and you're like, dang it, I can't believe I should have fast forwarded the song, but I ended up sitting halfway through it before I made a change. And I think that's a good thing for the Chardonnay. Like, really, I'm having a Chardonnay and I really am enjoying it this much. So that's going to be my pairing for
poppy country.
Poppy country, like obnoxiously poppy country. There's not an ounce of actual cowboy in the singer. So,
an example?
Oh, I mean, just any of those top 40 type country people folks these days.
What about the Walla Walla Syrah?
Walla Walla Syrah, I would go with like, I think that's going to go with more of like punk rock type vibe. I think, edgier, spicier, So that, and probably like a little bit because of the flavor profiles too, being a little bit more musty. That like you go like more old school stuff, like like a something. But then it has this little pop up to it. Like one of my favorite bands of all time is the Descendants. So I'd go with Descendants.
Okay. And the Tally Pinot Noir.
I'm gonna go with like classic rock, kind of because it's kind of your parents' wine, but it's also those.
But it's so cool.
But it's timeless. There's like a timeless factor to it that I think that I would pair that with. That it's like it's still cool, but it's been, But my folks would also be into listening to it with me at the same time.
Okay, I was gonna let you go, but I do want to know what you'd pair with your pet nat.
Pet nat. We actually have a line that I don't know if the pet nat would pair with it, but like a lot of the wines, when we go from this like it's sort of a crossover style where it's like it is a specific category, but then it's like crossed over into mainstream. Mm-hmm. And actually, my buddy Steve is my distributor in Chicago. He had this. I'm gonna steal the line from him, but he would. I remember I'm trying to think which wine it was, but he texted me after I'd sent him like a wine to try out, and he's like, "Oh, it's a full T Swift crossover," and it's like, and it's one of those things. Like, yeah, but she's always been poppy, but to go from being in the country world to like the mainstream, one of the biggest stars on the planet, like she crossed over all lines on everything, like gotten out of all categories.
It's a little T Swift with the pet nat. I like it. Well, Andrew, I want to thank you for joining us today here at Wine Soundtrack. Before we go, if people want to come visit you, we're sitting in your tasting room. Tell us how people can find you and your wines.
Yeah, so tasting rooms open 7 days a week in Tin City, which we're industrial complex just south of downtown Paso Robles. That and you can spend an entire day just in Tin City. I think we're up to like 20 wine producers, brewery, cider house, distillery, sheep smoke ice cream creamery, pasta factory. Like it's a really cool hub of just craft artisanal products to come explore.
I love that.
So
make an appointment, come to field recordings.
Yeah, with current requirements in 2020, we asked to have people make appointments. Appointments are definitely recommended, but they're not required. If we do have an open table, we are happy to take anybody.
Fantastic. And while people make their plans to come to Paso Robles and come to field recordings, I know you had mentioned that on your list, the top of your bucket list is Italy. Is there somewhere particular in Italy that's at the top of your list?
The northern part is definitely so a couple things. Well, two areas that I'd want to go to. I want to go to the Veneto area because we have the only vineyard in Paso Robles with Corvina, Rondinella, and Molinara.
Wow.
And so I've been really into that area of wines, but then I've also been really infatuated lately with Piedmont. So it's what my neighbor who's an Italian wine fanatic. I mean, he only makes Italian varieties and stuff. He's like, when you start getting into Nebbiolo, you know that your palate has gone full circle. Like, there's nothing more evolved on tasting palate than to try to pick apart Barolo.
Well, congratulations for getting there.
So, I don't know if I'm there yet, but he's like, it was like when I was talking to him about it one day. He's like, yeah, like if you're into that, like you've gone like fully into the dark side. So.
Well, you continue on your dark side into Nebbiolo, domestic and international, and everyone else listening, get out here to Paso Robles and try field recordings. Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.